Welcome to the story of a framework knitter. Framework knitting lay at the heart of industrialisation in Nottinghamshire. It formed the basis of the country's textile industry, employed thousands of people, and produced a whole range of hosiery goods for both domestic and foreign markets. Knitting was performed on machines known as stocking frames that were operated by a combination of hand and foot movements. The frame is reputed to have been invented in 1589 by the Reverend William Lee of Calverton. During the 17th century, framework knitting spread rapidly throughout London and the East Midlands. I've been delving through my family history for some time now, and more recently I've been fascinated with my Nottinghamshire ancestor who were framework knitters. So I'm going to share with you the story of the framework knitters. My story begins with William Bramley, who was born in 1665 and is my 9 times great-grandfather. It's difficult to find much information about ancestors that lived so long ago, but what we do know is that he married Dorcas Harvey. They are married by licence at St Peter's in Nottingham on the 8th of March 1697. And the following year, the newlyweds are blessed with their first child, Eleanor, who is christened on the 1st of December, shortly followed by another daughter, Mary, in 1702. A few years later, in 1708, the couple have a son and name him William Bramley after his father, and he's baptised on the 19th of January. The couple could have had more children, but records are very difficult to find, so we're going to skip forward a few years until young William is getting married. He marries Elizabeth Smith at St Leo de Gerius in Basford on the 5th of December 1732. We know that the young couple, William and Elizabeth, are blessed with a son. John Bramley is born in 1736, shortly followed by 2 more boys, Joseph and William. Joseph may not have survived childhood, although we can't be sure, but a few years later the couple have another child and call him Joseph. At the ripe old age of 74, William Bramley, the father of William and husband of Dorcas, passes away and is buried at St Leo de Gerius on the 24th of July in 1739. Following the death of his father, William and Elizabeth go on to have more children, a daughter Mary, followed by a son Joseph, Thomas and Elizabeth in 1748, taking their family to 7 children. At this point in the mid-1700s, the story of my ancestors moved from Basford to Hucknall Torkard, and the first piece of information showing this move is the marriage of their eldest son, John Bramley, who marries Anne Moss at St Mary Magdalene's on the 26th of November 1759. A few years later, the couple are blessed with a daughter, Mary, followed by Anne and then John. More children follow, and then Thomas Bramley is born in 1767, followed by Sarah, William, twins Elizabeth and Anne, and finally their 9th child, James, in 1779. The couple's 9 children are all baptised at St Mary Magdalene's. At the ripe old age of 76, William Bramley, father of John and husband of Elizabeth, passes away and is buried at St Mary Magdalene on the 26th of February 1784. Towards the end of the 18th century, we see young Thomas Bramley, the son of William and Elizabeth, marrying Anne Sergi on the 21st of May at St Mary Magdalene. Later that year, they are blessed with their first child and name him John. Sadly, the baby does not survive and he is buried aged 1 month. Over the next 20 years, Thomas and Anne Bramley go on to have 9 more children, including son James in 1793, and their 10th and final child, Eliza, was born in 1807. A census of stocking frames taken in Nottinghamshire in 1812 revealed that there were 9,285 frames in the country, with no less than 2,600 in Nottingham alone. With technical modifications, frames became capable of producing not only hose, but also gloves, shirts, shawls, and other garments. Yet framework knitting always remained a largely domestic occupation, with most frames being installed in the knitter's own homes. Framework knitting often involved whole families in the production process. Husbands or older male members of the household usually operated the frames, whilst wives and female children were generally employed in spinning and finishing the hose. As the frames were so expensive to buy, many knitters were obliged to rent their frames from the hosiers. Many hosiers even owned the homes in which the knitters and their families lived. In the early 1800s, the framework knitting industry was thrown into a deep crisis. The Napoleonic Wars had caused a dramatic decline in the demand for hosiery, and prices slumped and countless framework knitters found themselves facing unemployment and poverty. In reaction to the prevailing crisis, some hosiers were accused of raising frame rents. In the name of Ned Ludd, a Robin Hood-style figure, some knitters took to breaking the frames of hosiers associated with their oppressive conditions.
March the 11th, 1811, was the beginning of the Luddite disturbances. A meeting of hundreds of framework knitters was held in Nottingham Market to protest against wage reductions, irregularities in frame rents, the truck system, middlemen, need of price lists, and other grievances. When night set in, the men marched to Arnold and smashed 53 frames. On November the 4th, the Luddites assailed Mr. Hollingsworth's house at Bulwell, wherein were 8 persons armed with muskets. A Luddite named Wesley of Arnold was shot dead at Hollingsworth's door. His dying words? "Proceed, my brave fellows. I die with a willing heart." In the same week, 1,000 men met at the 7th milestone on Mansfield Road, about 300 of these carrying muskets or pistols, and others carrying pitchforks and various sorts of weapons. They marched to Sutton and broke up 54 frames. 3 Arnold men and 1 from Hucknall were caught by dragoons and sent post-chase to the county jail. In 1812, the Home Secretary moved for leave to bring in bills for punishing Luddites and making Luddism punishable by hanging, and these were introduced into the House of Lords. Lord Byron, the poet, when in his 24th year, strongly opposed the measure in his maiden speech, in which occurs this sentence: "The perseverance of these miserable men in their proceedings tends to prove that nothing but absolute want could have driven a large and once honest and industrious body of people into the commission of excesses so hazardous to themselves, their families, and the community."
It is interesting to note that a Mr. Thomas Bramley supplied Lord Byron with some information for this speech. They met casually on the Quarry Bank Road. Is this my Thomas Bramley? This is such a tantalising piece of information. Did my ancestor challenge the frame breakers' bill?
Nottingham Journal, 7th of March 1812. House of Lords. On the order of the day being read for the House going into a committee on the National Frame Breakers Bill, Earl Grosvenor moved that the order should be discharged. He had hoped that a noble lord, Liverpool, would have discharged the order himself when he came to a full knowledge of the nature of this obnoxious measure, which he seemed not to possess on its last discussion. By this dreadful statute, their lordships would inflict death on anyone who would enter a house without force and merely damage a few threads of lace. Such a bill he could not contemplate without horror, and he was sure it was one that would send a firebrand through the empire, or perhaps lead to consequences most fatal to the peace of the country. In his opinion, its immediate effect would be to make the act of violence it was meant to suppress more numerous and violent. His lordship concluded by moving that the order should be discharged, and declared his intention, if he failed to that motion, to move in the committee that the punishment of transportation should be substituted for that of death. Earl Grosvenor moved as an amendment to one clause that instead of a capital felony, the offence should be made a misdemeanour, punishable with 14 years transportation. This amendment was also negatived. Lord Grenville then objected to the clause making it a misdemeanour not to give information before a magistrate within 48 hours of breaking a frame, but he did not persist in his objection. The bill then went through the committee, adjourned. Nottingham Journal, 7th of March 1812. The Commission of Assisi will be opened at this place on Friday next. There are at this time 20 prisoners for trial in the county jail, 5 of whom are charged with having riotously, and with force of arms assembled together and disturbed the public peace, and 7 are charged with frame breaking and other acts of felony.
Let's return to Thomas's story. In the midst of the turmoil of the Luddite Rebellion, Thomas loses his father, Gt Bramley, who dies and is buried on the 15th of August, then shortly followed by his mother Anne. His parents are buried together at St Mary Magdalene, Hucknall Torkard. His son James gets married to Ellen Rhodes on the 12th of December 1814. Ellen must have been heavily pregnant with their first child, as William Bramley is born to the newlyweds and baptised on the 29th of January 1815. On the baptism record, the father's occupation is listed as labourer in manufacture. Is this the cotton industry? James and Ellen have a further 14 children over the next 26 years, including 2 sets of twins, 2 infant deaths, and both passing away at only 3 months of age. In 1821, the population of Hucknall Torkard was recorded as 2,028. There were 330 families dwelling in Hucknall, of whom 70 were engaged in agriculture and 220 in the cotton trade, the majority of the latter being employed in stocking making. In 1824, Hucknall's own Lord Byron died and was buried at St Mary Magdalene, Hucknall, on July the 16th, 1824. His body was brought from Greece to England and embalmed in spirits in the brig Florida. The personal appearance of the body had not changed much when it was transferred to the coffin in London. The remains were conveyed by road to Nottingham, halting at the night at Welling, Higham Ferris and Oakham. The coffin and urn were viewed by thousands of people in the Blackmoor's Head Inn at the bottom of Pelham Street in Nottingham. At 11 o'clock on Friday, July the 16th, the funeral procession moved up Mansfield Road and passed through Papawick and Limby and onto the Wiggy, and hence to the church, which had been visited all the morning by great numbers of people, most of whom also looked in the vault. The minute bell began to toll at 1:30, and some special visitors were permitted to enter the church, where the splendid but mournful procession arrived at 18 minutes to 4 o'clock. In 1837, James's eldest son, William Bramley, marries Catherine Bellion on the 29th of May in nearby Sutton in Ashfield. They have a son and call him William after his father. He is baptised on the 15th of March 1840 at St Mary and the Virgin All Souls in Bulwell. The 1841 census is the first time we can really paint a picture of the life of my ancestors living in Hucknall. The census shows there are now 301 shops and 801 stocking frames. So still, framework knitting is a major source of employment in the area. Let's look at James Bramley, spelt incorrectly as Brambly. He's aged 45 and living with his wife Ellen and 6 children on Wiggy Lane. The census lists the occupation of James and daughter Ellen as cotton hose makers. The neighbour, Samuel Mellows, is also a cotton hose maker, as are the neighbours on nearby Towel Roller. A few doors away on Wiggy Lane is a schoolmaster and registrar, Frederick Ward, with 15 people in his household, made up of his family, a teacher, and pupils aged between 6 and 15 years of age. A map of the area from 1888 has Wiggy Nook situated just off Annesley Road. Today, Wiggy Road could be found at the top of Hucknall and is now the B6011, connecting Annesley Road with the village of Linby. But the older map shows no dwellings on this road. It is more likely, therefore, that James Bramley and family are living on Wiggy Nook, just off Annesley Road. Nearby at Taylor's Building, we can see brother of James, Joseph Bramley, also spelled incorrectly as Brumley. He's aged 35 and living with his wife Mary and their 6 children. Joseph is a cotton hose maker alongside their daughter Jane, who's aged 15. Living with them is the brother's elderly father, Thomas Bramley, and he's now aged 75. Amazingly, a photo has survived of Thomas Bramley's home. It is clear from the photo of Taylor's Building that the homes were those of framework knitters, from the now mainly bricked up extended windows. The frames would be placed next to the window to take advantage of the amount of natural light. Taylor's Building on Portland Street was demolished in 1939. Now let's look at the newlyweds. William Bramley, son of James Bramley, unfortunately is in the Radford Union workhouse along with his wife Catherine, aged 25. Their young son William is now just 1 year old, and they also have a newborn baby, Joseph, although it's not clear if the baby was born in the workhouse. This particular census was taken on the 6th of June, and just a few weeks later, baby Joseph dies and is buried on the 18th of July. A few weeks later still, wife Catherine dies, aged only 26. It must have been a terrible time for William Bramley to start his married life together in the workhouse, and then to lose both his wife and his young son so close together. Thankfully, we know that the father and son do survive the workhouse. It's interesting to note that both mother and baby are buried near the workhouse at St Peter's, when it was the custom of workhouses of that time to send the deceased back to their own parish for the cost to be incurred by them. A few years later, in 1844, widow William Bramley remarries to Elizabeth Pike on the 22nd of December 1844 at St Peter's in Radford. Soon they have a son, Thomas Bramley. A daughter, Sarah Ann, is also born to William and Elizabeth. They have her baptised on the 22nd of November 1850 at St Mary of the Purification in nearby Blidworth. Also baptised on the same day is older brother Thomas, who is now 2 years old. The 1851 census of that year shows the newly married William and Elizabeth living in Blidworth village with their children Thomas, aged 2, Sarah Ann, aged 5 months, and also William, son of Catherine, who is now aged 11 and a scholar. We can see on the report that William is working as a framework knitter. His neighbours include a tailor, a framework knitter pauper, a cordwainer, and another 2 framework knitters. Closer inspection of the village shows that the majority of residents are farmers or farm labourers, apart from this small grouping of 4 framework knitters. Back in Hucknall Torkard, the census of that year shows James Bramley, He's now aged 55 and is also a framework knitter working in hose and living with his wife Ellen on towel roller. Living with them are son Job, who's aged 30, unmarried and a labourer, and a daughter Maria, aged 18, also unmarried and a seamer. They also have 2 grandchildren living with them, George, aged 4, and Charles, aged 1. Nearby at top of crofts is elderly father and grandfather Thomas Bramley, lodging with John and Mary Barker. He is now aged 85 and listed as a pauper. Around the end of the 1850s, Thomas Bramley, father of James, dies at the age of 90 years old, shortly followed by his son James. The 1861 census shows William Bramley has returned to Hucknall and is living on Annesley Road. He is no longer working as a framework knitter and has become a licensed hawker. This brought to an end the occupation of framework knitters for my Brumley ancestors.
The eventual decline of framework knitting was hastened in the late 1800s by the increasing application of steam power to hosiery production, which required the building of purpose-built factories.
By the early 1900s, hand-frame knitting was fighting a losing battle for survival, and Luddism was remembered as a brief, although stormy, period of Nottingham's history.
The Framework Knitters Museum in Ruddington is a unique surviving example of a 19th century frame knitter's yard. It is one of the only places left in the country where you'll find the working and living conditions of this important, contentious and dangerous industry perfectly preserved for you to experience and explore.
Nottingham Journal, 7th of March 1812. Arthur Lords.
In the early 1800s, framework knitting wages were falling. Workers were living in extreme poverty and often being exploited by unscrupulous masters. The knitters sent a petition to Parliament, but didn't get the help they needed. Years of hardship led to frustration, and the Luddite Rebellion erupted in 1811. Starting in Nottingham, the Luddites attacked the factories owned by the worst master hosiers, breaking the knitting frames and assaulting the owners. They took the name Luddites after their mythical leader, Ned Ludd of Sherwood Forest. Outbreaks of Luddite violence soon spread, and the government sent in troops and passed a law to make frame breaking punishable by death. The uprising was quashed in 1816. Welcome, Ned Ludd, your case is good. Make Percival your aim, for by this bill 'tis understood it's death to break a frame. With dexterous skill the hosiers kill, for they are quite as bad. And die you must, by the late bill, go on, my bonny lad. You might as well be hung for death as breaking a machine. So now, my lad, your sword unsheath, and make it sharp and keen. We are ready now your cause to join, whenever you may call. So make foul blood run clear and fine of tyrants great and small. Access to Ancestry Library Edition is available free of charge from Inspire Libraries and Nottinghamshire Archives, offering billions of records to start searching and discovering your family's history. Discover history as it happened by accessing hundreds of historic newspapers from all over Britain and Ireland for free via Inspire Libraries and Nottinghamshire Archives.